to another doll repaint video. For my first doll of the year, I wanted to jump right into my Tarot doll series with a card that is perfect for new beginnings and New Year resolutions, and that's the World card. If you don't know, I've been working on a series of dolls based on the major arcana and queen cards of the Tarot deck. At the end of my last video, I asked you guys to help me choose which doll out of the 3 cards I drew to do next. I've actually drawn both the Justice card and the Lovers card before, but I couldn't help but gravitate toward the World card. Sometimes you just have to follow where inspiration takes you, and I just haven't come up with a fully formed idea for the other 2 cards yet. And they're so important that I really want to make sure that I do them, well, justice. For those of you who have been waiting patiently for the Lovers and the Justice card, don't worry, I will get to them eventually, and hopefully after I talk about the World card a little bit more, you'll understand why I think it's the perfect card to start the new year with. So for being called the World card, the card is strangely airborne. Here we see a woman wrapped in a cloth, floating in the air in the center of a laurel wreath. The World card is the last card in the major arcana sequence, and it can be considered one of the most positive cards in the deck, where like the Sun card, it doesn't have a strong negative meaning, no matter how it appears. When the World card is drawn, you're most likely about to enter a period of your life where you complete some large project, achieve a huge goal, or come to some sort of sense of closure or accomplishment. And if you haven't entered that period yet, you're really close. And you're about to be able to bask in the joy that you feel after taking in all the success that came from your hard work, while also looking back on what was necessary to make progress, and the feelings of gratitude for spiritual awakenings and life lessons that enriched your life along the way. For my doll, I want to tap into these feelings of joy and accomplishment while still honoring the fact that big changes and projects can come with humbling and life-changing hard work along the way. And it's up to you to be receptive to these lessons so you can keep working and keep pushing yourself in your next project. Alright, I'm ready to get started. I know you're ready to get started. So, let's get started. While I was selecting a doll for this project, I wanted to use someone who I thought captured the wholesomeness and enthusiasm that I associate with the card. While I was digging through my dolls, I pulled out this Frankie doll, and there was just something about her big doe eyes and pouty lip smile that I found endearing and perfect for this doll. Jumping into the prep, I'm starting by soaking the doll's head in boiling hot water, which will make it easier to remove the doll's head so we can remove the old hair plugs. Next up, I'm going to be removing Frankie's beautifully painted on facial features using some pure acetone nail polish remover. And I also have a little bit of prep to do on her body. Frankie has some painted on stitches that I'm also going to be removing with acetone. And she has some neck bolts that I'm just going to snip off and file down with a nail file. Now it's time to start the next bit of prep, and I'm going to start stage 1 of putting in her new hair. Today I'll be using this lovely long green doll hair. I'll go into more detail about why I chose this hair later, but I really like this color and it has this sort of pearl essence-ness to it that I adore. As I usually do when using nylon doll hair, I'm using a hooked needle, scooping some hair into the prongs, and pushing the hair through into the plastic of the scalp. Frankie's original hair had a nice center part just like I want for my doll, so I'm going to add new hair plugs all along the old plug holes. It's been an hour or so, and here's my progress. You'll see that towards the bottom of her head, I've skipped quite a few rows of plugs. I'm kind of experimenting here. Her hair is going to be quite long, which means that it could be potentially quite bulky when I work on styling her hair. My hope is that if I add rows closer together at the top of the head while skipping some rows at the bottom, I'll be able to get full hair coverage and less of the bulk. We shall see. It was also at this point that I realized that I forgot to paint her scalp green, which would help make sure that her hair doesn't look patchy between the plugs. So I really hope my plan works out. Sometimes I do get ahead of myself. Here's what she looks like now that I've finished stage 1 of the reroot. You'll notice that I left a wide gap between where I ended the rows of hair and her hairline. This is so I can add pigments further up on her scalp while I do my face up, which will help me avoid missing any spots on her face because of the sock I'm adding to protect her hair from sealant and pigments. It's face up time. I've gone ahead and prepped my doll's skin with 3 coats of Mr. Super Clear Sealant to get a nice base to apply pigment to. And now I'm starting to build up my doll's skin tones using soft pastels. This doll presents an interesting challenge because I want to go from this pale green color to a Caucasian skin tone. It might be seen as a disadvantage going from a fantasy skin color to a realistic one, but in this case, it could be used in my favor while building up the subdermal skin tones because I can use this color as the blue zones. So after setting up the red and yellow zones, I'm just going to punch up the blues in a few areas. I've sealed in the undertone layers, but now I want to start shifting her skin color to a realistic color, and to do that, I'll be applying a couple layers of this light burnt sienna color. After applying a couple of layers, I'm going to come in with a watercolor pencil and lightly draw on some vein lines, and then I'll apply another layer of skin tone color so it looks like they're sitting underneath the skin. After sealing the last layer of base skin tone, I want to add some freckling to her skin, so I'm spraying on some watered down acrylic paints to give the appearance of freckles and blemishes to the skin. I'm going a little ham on the freckles this time because I feel like the world basks in the rays of the sun, so she would have a bit more freckles kissing her skin. Next, before we start blocking in her facial features, I'm going to start blocking in her makeup. I'm going for a color-draped look with warm tones that match the colors on the world card. They also remind me of the colors of the sunset, which reminds me of the optimism that is portrayed on the card. Then before I seal everything in, I'm going to define the rest of her facial features with some contouring and highlights. Now, my preferred medium for adding facial details has been watercolor pencils, but with it being a frigid winter where I live, the sealant keeps drying in a really waxy way and I just can't get them to work. So I'm switching to acrylic paint on this doll. I've been getting more practice using acrylic paints on my dolls this season, and I feel like I've been able to start getting the fine details that I like. With them, and honestly, I think it's a good thing to switch things up every once in a while and learn things that are outside your normal routine. Here, I'm applying a wash of paint to make it look like there are shadows cast across the tops of her eyes. This will make it look like the eyes are sitting under her eyelashes and make them look more spherical. For her eye color, I'm layering her irises with a couple different shades of green. I chose green to go with the earth theme, and I think it will pair well with the colors that I use for her makeup. I'm really trying to take advantage of using paint for her irises, and so I'm going to be trying to layer everything to make it look like the natural marbled texture that irises have. Now with some white paint, I want to punch up the whites of her scleras a bit, and I'll be adding the fun little catchlight details. Next, with a very fine brush, I'm painting on the upper and lower lashes. For the upper lashes, I'm using black paint, but for the lower lashes, I'm going to be using a brown color just so they don't look as overpowering as the upper lashes. To give the lashes a little bit of pizzazz, I like to add some white lashes to make them look fuller and like she has individual lashes. For her eyebrows, I really wanted to draw them on using pencils, but alas, the pencils wouldn't take here either, so paint it is. I love to draw on individual hair marks on eyebrows, which is a little bit harder to achieve using paint, or at least I think so, but I'm going to try my best to get that look using a super fine brush and different tones of green paint. And I decided to go with green eyebrows to match her lovely green hair. For her lips, I'm going with a rose pink color and applying it in thin layers until I get nice full coverage. Since her eyes and eyebrows have a lot of details, I didn't want to overpower her face with too many details on the lips, so I'm giving her a subtler look with some soft contouring on the lips and some soft texture lines. And finally, to make her lips pop just a little bit more, I've added a nice highlight at the bottom lip, and I'm highlighting the top of the upper lip like you might do when applying highlighter makeup. For a final touch, I'm coming in with some Sculpty Gloss to give her eyes a realistic shine and to make the lips look like she's wearing a glassy lip gloss. And now, friends, we're going to start working on her outfit, which is where we start really diving into the symbolism behind the World card. The World card is all about finding fulfillment and having a sense of achievement after completing a long-term project. It's often the case that a long-term project is really a series of parts that have come together to build the bigger picture. With that in mind, I kept thinking about quilts and how they are projects that are literally made up of lots of little parts. Then I came across this outfit from Victor and Rolf's Spring 2020 collection, and it was like the heavens beamed it down on my computer screen. It was just such a perfect inspiration for what I was wanting for my doll's outfit. So today, I'll be using this patchworky dress as my reference point and inspiration, but with my own World card twist. The whole outfit is going to be composed of a bunch of different patchwork, but the base of the dress will be made of a blend of these three fabrics. The first fabric is this loud explosion of color. The fabric also contains all the colors that will be featured on this doll, and these are also the colors that appear on the actual World card. The first part of putting together this outfit is blending all these different fabrics together to create the basic pattern pieces of my dress. Today, I will be Frankie Stiening two different moonlight jewel patterns together, her lowly dress and the Neapolitan dress. For the skirt and the ruffle of the dress, I've broken the pattern into different parts so I can put them back together using my different fabrics. So there'll be one piece made up of different parts. The next detail I want to add to my pattern pieces is adding in some decorative stitches to the lines where the fabrics meet. I'm using this to represent the different lessons, trials, and techniques that can go into the creative process. Plus, it gives me an excuse to play with the different stitches on my sewing machine. Next up, I'm going to add some patch embellishments onto the skirt of the dress. I have a really hard time getting rid of scraps of fabric, so I have a lot of options to choose from for my little patches, and I've narrowed it down to a few that I think will go well with the base fabrics.
I mean, all the patterns are kind of clashing, but I kind of love that. I'm going for a clashing in patterns but harmonizing in colors kind of vibe. While I add the patches to the dress, I'm trying to keep in mind where I'm going to be gathering the fabric later and trying not to put it too close to those areas. I'm also going to be adding borders of decorative stitching around the edges of the patches, and I don't want the stitches to interfere with my gathers. Which, spoilers, they did do a little bit here and there. But I had my vision and I was going for it.
And before we can finally start putting this dress together, I have to modify my pattern just one more time.
One detail I really liked on the Victor and Rolf dress were their really poofy sleeves. After doing some research, I believe the style of these sleeves are called bishop sleeves. After doing some further digging, I learned how to modify our pattern to make them into bishop sleeves, and so that's exactly what I'm going to do with this pattern piece. Per the instructions, I've cut the pattern and fanned it out so it will have a really large poof to it. Next, I'm tracing around the extended piece so I can make a new pattern piece so that I can again cut it into two different pieces. So, well, you guessed it, blend two different fabrics together. On one sleeve, I've added a patch with a little beetle on it, which I'm using to represent the need to sometimes get your hands dirty while pushing to get through a project or a goal. And on a personal note, I use this fabric on an article of clothing I made for myself, which, as you may know, sewing has been a big learning journey for me. So, kind of full circle here. The other patch has a star from the fabric that I used for my star cards dress. Sometimes big goals or projects can make you really dig deep and learn more about yourself and what you're capable of. This star represents the enlightenment that can come from that new sense of self. Oh my goodness, I feel like this might be one of the most involved garments I've ever made. But looking at all the pieces together, I am so excited to make this dress. First up, I'm going to be putting together the bodice of the dress. Here we can see I used the simple blue fabric and a little bit of patchwork. I didn't want to add too many patches to the top because we're going to be adding a lot of fun touches in a bit. First, I added a little undershirt using one of the fabrics that I used for a panel on the skirt, and I added lace trim. Next, I'm going to be adding this frilly trim around the armholes. Our inspiration dress has this really fun ruffling around the arms and collar, and I want to incorporate that into my look as well. On the card, she has a sash that wraps around her and floats in the wind, and this is my nod to that floaty, airy feeling. And I also want it to represent the joy and light-hearted feeling you get while celebrating your triumphs and the pride of achieving your goals. Off camera, I added little cuffs to the sleeves, and the next step is adding them to the bodice. But I'm not going to go into a whole bunch of detail about that because after trying to turn the sleeves right side out, the cuffs of the sleeves got stuck on the inside and I can't get them to turn out. I've also ripped the sleeves trying. So I'm going to have to make the sleeves all over again while trying to keep the beetle and star in mind while I do so. Getting my hands dirty to get the results I want, and the personal growth involved in dusting myself off and trying again and not weeping loudly while I carefully pick out all the stitches. Okay. I'm back with new sleeves, and I decided instead of adding the cuffs, I'm instead going to make faux cuffs by gathering the fabric and stitching it into place. When I sew the sleeves closed, I'm not going to sew the sleeves all the way down, so I can have a little bit of give while I flip it right side out. Let's see if this works. Now it's time to gather the skirt, which wasn't the easiest because of the patches, and it's also time to attach the skirt to the bodice. Off camera, I closed the dress up in the back and added closures, and now it's the moment of truth, putting it on our doll and seeing how it looks. I've also made her a cute little pair of white knee-high socks. I went with this fabric because I think it complements the little shoulder ruffles nicely. Now that I have them on, I just have to sew them up a little in the back and at the feet to make them nice and snug. From my doll shoe collection, I'm giving her this little pair of Cupid shoes. I think the pink will be very cute with her outfit, and they play perfectly into a whole cherub theme that we'll talk about very soon.
Next for our doll, we're going to be making her something very literal for the world card, and that's going to be a little model of the planet for her to pose with.
In addition to being about large projects or big chapters of your life coming to an end, the world card can represent large trips or travel in your future. So my little globe is going to represent that aspect of the card. Plus, as a bonus for me, I was that kid that always enjoyed making maps in geography class, so this is going to be some straight up nerdish fun for me. For our planet, I'll be using the styrofoam ball. I plan on painting on the details, and to keep the styrofoam from soaking up all the paint, I'm going to give it a couple layers of Mod Podge as a protective coating. After the Mod Podge completely dried, I used a stencil to draw on the continents. Well, almost all the continents. The stencil wasn't really exactly to scale, and I didn't have enough room for Antarctica at the bottom. But, you know, Antarctica schmartica, right? Who's gonna miss that? First things first, I'm going to start painting in the oceans. I'm first coming in with a basic blue coat, but then I'm going to come in and start adding some texture and details around the coastlines, just so that it's not just one flat shade of blue. Next, while referencing Google Earth, I'm going to start painting the different areas of land, starting with the deserts / the more arid areas of the world. Then I'm going into the more lush green looking areas, working my way from the lighter green areas to the deeper green places, which again I'm basing on the Google Earth view. Then off camera, I went in and added as many of the island nations as I possibly could, and repeated the same painting process that I did on the continents. Apologies if I missed your country, but I really did try to get every island as possible. And when I said that no one would miss Antarctica, I lied. It really bothered me that it wasn't there, so for this step, I'm going to add an amorphous blob to the bottom of the globe to make it look like there are clouds down there, and maybe Antarctica is there too if you squint. I'm also going to add some clouds here or there to make it look like our globe has a cute little atmosphere. After everything had dried, I then sprayed our globe with a coat of glossy Mr. Super Clear to make it look more like our little blue marble. The globe isn't quite finished yet because I got it a little stand for it to sit on, which I'm going to use to incorporate some of the other characters that you see on the card. On the card, you see that in the four corners, there's an eagle, which represents vision and power, the lion, which represents bravery and vigilance, the bull, which represents power, and the bro. Okay, this is actually a cherub, which I would never have guessed just looking at it, but he represents guidance and protection. In my toy stash, I have these little animal toys that I'm going to use to represent the three animals. I've got the cow, but for the eagle, I'm going to have to substitute a chicken, and for the lion, I'll be using a cat. Sometimes you gotta do what you gotta do. For the cherub, I found this, dapper fellow. And now for the brutal part of this makeover, I'm going to be beheading them. Now that I have a collection of heads, I'm going to be placing them on the stand, trying my best to arrange them so that they mark the 4 corners of the globe. Now, this ring with heads on it looks a bit odd, just as it is, so to make it appear less horrifying and more decorative, I'm going to take it outside and give it a couple coats of gold spray paint. Now that the face-up is done, we can free the mats of hair from her hair bonnet and add the last rows of hair plugs. Here is her fully plugged head of hair, and it is long. I'm going to be styling it in a moment, but before that, I want to tame how much the hair floofs and sticks out. I'm going to try this method that I learned from the Doll Planet again and flatten it with my hair iron. And here is where my heart fell out of my butt. Even though I was trying to be careful, I just saw that I burned a little part of her face. It was at this point that I had to turn off my camera and step away because, I'll be honest here, I felt absolutely gutted. I also had to think about what I was going to do with that little burn, because even if I added more pigment, there was still going to be a noticeable spot there. Because of where the burn was, I finally came up with the idea of placing these little gems under her eyes to cover it up. It looks cute, but not something I would have added unless it was necessary. But keeping the world card in mind, when it's reversed, it can mean that sometimes you have to accept and embrace where you are and move on. So, moving on, let's start styling her hair for real. On the card, the main figure is surrounded by a large circular wreath. This is a laurel wreath, and it symbolizes a continual cycle of successful completions and new beginnings. The figure of the card is stepping out of it as she finishes one phase and starts a new one almost right away. I gave her green hair to mimic this full circle wreath, and I'm going to give her long braided pigtails to make it look like the long, continuous woven wreath on the card. On the card, the wreath is held together by 2 red strings, so I'm going to tie off her braids with a bit of red yarn. Now it's time to put the head back on the body, and I'm going to be extra cautious after the whole hair iron mishap, and I'm going to lightly heat up the plastic of her head so that it's easier to put her head back on. And here is a close-up look of our newest tarot girl, the world. Oh my gosh, the world was such a big project, and I am so crazy happy with how she turned out. Sure, there were some challenges that I had to work through, but you know, dusting yourself off and figuring out how to work around a challenge is part of being a creative person. And what a perfect message to keep in mind while working on the world card. It was a whole patchwork of lessons while growing and learning for the next big project. Like, for example, use a heat guard while using the flat iron next time. The cheek gems have grown on me, by the way. I'm really happy with how she turned out, from her hair and makeup to her outfit. I'm so happy with how busy and chaotic the outfit looks, while at the same time all the patterns harmonize together. I don't know why, but I do have a love for kind of loud fashion, and this outfit has a lot to say. This project was a great way to start the new year, and I'm looking forward to sharing more big projects with you. If you'd like to share the New Year love with me, please consider subscribing to my channel. This is still a pretty small channel, and every sub, like, and comment will help my channel get bigger, and it would make me so happy for me to hit some of my bigger goals this year. As always, let me know what you think of my doll in the comments below, and I hope you have a wonderful new year.
Alright, the world and I are gonna go talk about my next big project, but be sure to stay tuned to see which cards I'm going to draw next from the tarot deck, and I'll see you next time with another doll repaint video. Bye!
Okay, I've reshuffled those other 2 cards back into my deck, and here we go with the next 3. First, we have the Queen of Swords. Next, Strength. And finally, the High Priestess. And wow, that is a strong group of ladies. Please let me know who you're drawn to in the comments section, because it's going to be really hard for me to choose between the 3 of them.